development practitioner, I am passionate and have always been passionate and committed to working to improve the well-being of each individual so that they can meet their full potential. This is one of the reasons in my earlier days I was a youth leader and I remain an advocate for positive youth development. And more recently, I have been serving as CDB's focal point on youth development. As a senior youth. I don't know if any of you have heard that term. I'm looking for Michelle Small Bartley, Tiffany Scarrett Fleming, Asha Gay Cowell, and so many others of you who are familiar with our dear friend, Henry Wallace Charles, the godfather of youth development globally. So this was one of his favorite terms, and I now have adopted it, and his legacy lives on because of the work we continue to do. It is an absolute honor for me to have been working with children and young people across the region for a very long time. And in the lead up to this symposium and policy dialogue, we've been talking to students, to young people. We've heard from them in video submissions, audio submissions, written submissions about what they want to see and the difference they want to make and how they want education to be transformed in the region for them to be able to self-actualize. So why are we here today? Yes? This session will articulate a clear and compelling vision of how education leadership, inclusion, and transformation should be reframed to better serve the children and youth of the region. The importance of including youth voices in decision-making and ensuring that youth concerns and ideas are central to education policy and planning will be emphasized over and over and over again is absolutely important. Strategic actions and practical steps that can be taken to advance youth leadership in education will be proposed. I'm just going to give you some guidelines in terms of the framework we're going to use. So the time allotted for this session is 75 minutes. I will introduce each of our 4 presenters, and each of them will make their intervention. Following the presentations, you are participants here, and those joining online will be invited to engage in a question and answer segment, where you will be able to direct your questions to our panelists and also to provide your thoughts on their presentations. A few rules, yes? We want the session to run smoothly. So presenters have been reminded to adhere to the time allocated so that we are sure that everyone will have a chance to present and you have an opportunity to share with us. Our timekeeper, who I don't see, and who should be seated at the front and who will be here in time, will show us an orange card when there's 2 minutes to go, yes, and a red card. Now, typically in sports, when you see a red card, you've done something wrong. In this room, if you see a red card, you're about to do something wrong. So I ask that you listen actively to their presentations. Some of them are very experienced, some of them are newer to this space, but all of them have very powerful messages to share today. So allow me to introduce our 4 distinguished young leaders. First, Ms. Asha Gay Cowell, a development professional with years of experience in youth development, leadership, and policy advocacy. With a background in public administration and development management, she has made significant contributions to mainstreaming youth engagement in governance. Asha is known for her passionate commitment to youth empowerment and leadership and brings a wealth of knowledge on education policy, student engagement, and leadership development. She is the co-chair of the Caribbean Development Bank's Future Leaders Network, and she's the representative for Jamaica. Her presentation will explore strategic actions to advance youth leadership in education, focusing on retention, re-entry, and success. Asha Gay Cowell. Next. Our next speaker will be Anjali Sukra. She's a school guidance and counseling officer at the Guyana Ministry of Education Welfare District, a youth leader of the Guyana Council of Organization for Persons with Disabilities, GCOPD, and a youth leader for the Global Partnership for Education, GPE. She holds a bachelor's degree in social work and she is undertaking studies in counseling psychology. She has made significant contributions to education and disability advocacy in Guyana. Anjali is known for overcoming the challenges of her visual impairment to achieve academic excellence and for her active involvement in non-governmental organizations promoting electoral systems that are fair and just, education inclusion, and disabilities rights, along with mental health support. Anjali brings a wealth of knowledge on youth empowerment, disability advocacy, and counseling. Her presentation will focus very heavily on the inclusion of students and young people with mental health conditions, as well as special educational needs. These young people are very accomplished. Our third speaker is the lone male today, but not amongst our delegates. We've been working with children and youth delegates. This is just a part of the team with whom we've worked over the past several months, and you will be hearing from more of them over the course of the 3 days. Varun Sam. Varun is a 20-year-old Trinidadian. He is a pundit in training at Sri Parameshwari Durga Devi Ashram, as well as a student pursuing a bachelor's degree in information technology. Varun dedicates his time to helping others, especially children and young people across Trinidad. He will share based on his experience and that of his peers, as well as from secondary research, with a focus on the factors that lead to students' early exit from the education system. And he will share a number of recommendations on preventing disengagement and early school leaving, including perspectives on their inclusion in leadership and decision-making. And finally, last but by no means least, Rianka Chance, hailing from St. Vincent and the Grenadines and of Garifuna descent. Rianka Chance is a dedicated advocate for education, youth empowerment, mental health, and climate action. In 2022, she was selected as a US Youth Ambassador and established a debating society to foster critical thinking and intellectual growth among students. We've been hearing so much of that today, the need to have multiple opportunities to build critical thinking amongst our young people. And Rianka has been at the fore of efforts in her country. Rianka now serves as a global youth leader with the GPE, the Global Partnership for Education. She's championing equitable and inclusive education systems. She's also the secretary of the United Nations Youth Advisory Group and the Let's Unpack It and UNICEF's mental health focal point. She has co-authored the Young Caribbean Minds Workbook, addressing the intersection of education, mental health, and climate resilience. Rianka will look at inclusion as well, with a focus on indigeneity and the link with youth leadership in education policy and planning. Again, join me in welcoming our very accomplished young people. You've heard enough from me. I'm sure you've come to hear the young people and not the senior youth. Asha Gay Cowell, I invite you to deliver your remark.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to greet you all and say, extending on to Kems, I normally start by saying good afternoon to the real youth, the experienced youth, and the seasoned youth here. So to all youth here, good afternoon. So we cannot have a conversation about education reform in the Caribbean without acknowledging the current system is deeply rooted in the past. And we heard about that early this morning. Arguably, the Caribbean's education system is a remnant, dare I say, a legacy of plantocracy. Whilst most regional states have gained independence within the last 60 years, systems still resemble the structures of its colonial past, still wear uniforms, rigid hierarchical, and is also exclusionary to many. During those same 60 years, we've experienced 3 industrial revolutions, with the most recent being accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic and the rise of AI. These revolutions have drastically transformed the global economy, yet our education system largely has remained unchanged and is still preparing for students for a world that no longer exists. It is within this context, that we need to focus on the reformation and transformation of our education systems, not only to modernize it, but to ensure that they are inclusive and equitable, meeting the needs of all students, especially those who are marginalized. I often like to think that we need to be more proactive and not reactive, and that's what this panel calls for. So, youth as co-creators in education and reform. So I'm going to take it a step further and emphasize that the process of transformation requires inclusion of youth as co-creators and leaders. Too often, education reforms are designed and implemented without direct involvement of the very people that these policies affect, or youth. Yet, is it the young people who live through the consequences of these policies and who are positioned who are positioned to offer fresh, innovative ideas for future education. So, what am I positioning here? Intergenerational dialogues. It's not to say that we're saying youth need to lead it, but to have them as co-creators. A wise man learns from his mistakes. A wiser man learns from the mistake of others. So, therefore, the co-creators is what I really want to emphasize here. Our national youth policy in Jamaica actually has an excerpt that says, youth must be meaningfully engaged, or we're going to fail to realize the vision. What vision was it making reference to? Vision 2030, which is in 5 years, technically 6. I mean, we're in October, so 5. While not in the room, I think it's very important to include her voice, Dr. Terry Ann Gilbert Roberts. She noted that youth exclusion is framed as a threat to the sustainability of the Caribbean community. Attempts to remedying the exclusion, however, has not been ad hoc. It has not been, it has been ad hoc and it has been unsustained. Dr. Henry Charles, here in spirit, he has said that youth development is heavily dependent on youth empowerment, which is considered the process of encouraging our youth to take charge of their lives. How do you do that? You empower them and you include them. History is replete of efforts that include youth in governance, such as the World Assembly of Youth, the International Year of Youth, the Caribbean Regional Strategy for Youth Development, and several others. Yet these initiatives are often plagued by implementation deficit, where youth participation was not sustained or adequately supported. Projectization versus programmatization. For instance, the CARICOM heads of government in the Declaration of Paramaribo again underscored the importance of youth participation, but without the necessary legislation and frameworks, these efforts prey socioeconomic, social, and political challenges. I'm going to even mention theoretical frameworks that speak to this. You have the hard study of youth participation. You have the share model of participation. There are several theories and frameworks that really promulgate the need for youth engagement in these processes, particularly in governance. So let me recenter the argument back to what we're speaking about here, education. I'm going to speak on lessons learned to show that it's not something that's new. What I was finding a gap in was the centering of youth in the education, especially. So therefore, you have a youth in landscape initiative. This was by the Global Landscape Partnership Forum, sorry. So therefore, they did partner with youth in this process, and they were supposed to help with the social science policies. But again, that sustainability came into question. You have the UNDSA Youth Participation, which is the United Nations Division for Inclusion on Social Development. Again, youth were also engaged, but that sustainability aspect came in question. Jamaica, my island home, in its development of its anti-bullying framework, it consulted with our youth, but how did it maintain that sustainability aspect? Questionable. The Youth Advisory Council of Jamaica, which I was a part of, we are able to contribute to different youth policies and frameworks, but are we contributing to the education policy that is important to us as young people that go forward? The CDB FLN, which I serve as co-chair on, we are able to contribute to a lot of the policies, well, not the policies, but the frameworks, and position our voices in the outcome statements. But again, how do we ensure that this ripples into our actual island homes and territories? So we can do it at that regional level, but ensuring that accountability on our individual territories is also important. As a Jamaica House Fellow, again, we were given policies to comment on and provide feedback. But I also felt that in some cases, I'm going to be very mindful here. There were situations where we were told we could not speak on that because of the political paradigm and the political landscape that we're in. We speak on something, we provide actual research to provide our to inform a particular concept, but then you're going to be told it may have bad implications on the politics of things. So, centering back the discourse to education and providing practical pathways in terms of how we can ensure that we don't just leave here with a talk shop. So, I'm going to give you 5 steps. And my co-chair of the CDBFLN, while not in the room, she likes to say you don't break institutions, you bend them. So I'm going to say these are my 5 steps to help us to bend them. Institutionalizing youth representation in education governance. So that's the step. How do we do that? Establish permanent youth advisory councils at both the national and regional level. These councils should have a formal voting seat on decision-making bodies like the Ministry of Education, boards, and policy committees. What's the action? Governments just need to create legislation to ensure that youth are mandated in that policy creation process. This removes the ad hoc nature of youth participation and embeds it in governance structures. Integrate youth voices in the curriculum reform. So launch curriculum creation projects where youth work directly with educators, policymakers, curriculum developers to design learning content that is relevant to their lives and future. What's the action there? Schools should allocate the resources for student-led curriculum workshops and partner with local universities to develop flexible, future-focused curricula that address skills like digital literacy, critical thinking, and emotional well-being. Implement structured youth engagement platforms. So build digital platforms where students can continuously provide feedback on their educational experience. This can take the form of online portals, mobile apps, where students engage in reports, reforms, and report reforms challenges and propose these solutions in very real time. So the action there is to call on ministries of education to develop and maintain these platforms, ensuring that they're actively monitored and responses are provided. Monitoring and evaluation of youth participation, often a missing step. We implement, we projectize, but then the learning that continues to ensure that there is future learning and sustainability. So develop key performing indicators to measure youth involvement in policy decisions. These should track the level of impact of youth participation in governance and curriculum reform. Securing funding for youth-led initiatives. That's often the missing link. There is need for funding in this regard. So create a youth innovation fund dedicated to supporting youth-led projects aimed at improving education. This can fund initiatives such as peer mentorship programs, mental health support services, or tech-driven learning solutions. So here are my final thoughts. Using the words of my Governor General, he says there's nothing wrong with Jamaica that can't be fixed with what is right with Jamaica. I'm going to extend to say there's nothing wrong with the Caribbean that can't be fixed with what is right with the Caribbean. And what's right with the Caribbean is our youth. So, again, Nelson Mandela also told us that education is the most powerful weapon that we can use to change the world. So how do we take those two? This morning we were told that we're in a war, on a train, but in a war. So if you give what is right with the Caribbean the right weapons to go forward, then we're clearly going to win the war.
Are you hearing me? Yes. Thank you, Asha, for setting the context so brilliantly, succinctly, sticking to time, but really giving us some food for thought and those 5 strategic actions, many of them low-hanging fruit, some medium to longer term, but I'm seeing PSs in the room nodding. I'm seeing technocrats in the room nodding. I know that these are actions that you have been thinking of, that you are looking to take on board, and we've got brilliant young people across the region who stand with you and are ready to contribute intellectual thought and time, energy, creativity. Anjali, over to you.
Hello, everybody. So I think my audio is supposed to come on, but with all of that, I know you're tired, and I know that your minds are at, they're not listening. So I want to. I'm being honest. I'm being honest. So I want to start with a little statement, and it says, "Our voices are like seeds, carrying the potential for growth and change. So let's take a moment to plant these seeds together." Now, I want you to join with me to relax your mind a bit. And you sit back on your chair, you put your shoulder blades together, your hands on your knees. You sit on a comfortable position where you could, relax your mind. Try to be quiet too, Not to sleep. It's just to get the mind working. And I want you to close your eyes and take a deep breath in. You take it in, all in. You hold for a few seconds and you release slowly everything out. Empty the lungs. One more time. In. You hold for a few seconds and you release slowly. Now, while your eyes are still closed, I want you to imagine that your young self living in the rural parts of our beautiful Caribbean. You're burning with potential, and your mind is alight with curiosity and dreams. But society sees you differently. Try to imagine. Your wheelchair cannot access the upper flat of your school, which limits your education. Your classroom is more like a cave than a place of enlightenment, but also reminds you of the daily barriers you face. The chalkboard, which is supposed to illuminate knowledge, is just a blur to your straining vision. And when you speak up, your voice, the seed of change, it is dismissed or it's taken for granted. Now, how would you feel? Take a few seconds to think about it. How would you feel as your young self, going through all of this? And you can open your eyes and, you know, keep that information to yourself. So, this is the reality for countless young people with disabilities across our region, but it doesn't have to be this way. Today, we're here to change the narrative. We're here to ensure that every seed that has potential change. Because when we amplify the youth voices in education, and policy planning, we're not just changing schools, but we're transforming lives. We're transforming lives, the lives of everyone. I would like to take a moment to place emphasis on the issues that is hindering the voices of our youths to be amplified. And the first issue is the education system, the inclusive education system, the state of it. Now, according to UNESCO, 90% of children with disabilities in developing countries do not attend school. And I'm placing emphasis on the 90%. 90% of persons with disability. That could include me. I wouldn't have been here. Now, this is because many schools lack proper infrastructure and support systems for students with disability. And also, while there is a number of trained teachers within the SEN field, special education needs field, there still needs to be more. Now, that is my first issue I want to place emphasis on because without education, we cannot go further. The second issue I want to talk about is mental health supports. Now, mental health, our mind, it is our consciousness. We think we are able to make good decisions. We're able to understand how we feel. We're able to do things because we have a conscious mind. Now, if this is being challenged, for example, mental health issues, then this cannot be so. According to the World Health Organization, 10 to 20% of children and adolescents worldwide experience mental health issues. So, in breakup, that is like two students in every 10, right? Which is a very alarming number because your partners could be having a mental health issue and you may not know, because I will go on to say that there's a stigma that is attached to mental health issue. And I think we're aware of the stigma that is attached to mental health issue. People, when you speak up, or when people see you where I'm living, where people see you, when people see you go to a therapist or you go to a mental health organization, you're considered to be mad. I just don't want to say it. But you're not mad, you're just considered to be mad. And now everything that comes out of you or everything you do, people take for granted. But that is not the case. People have different forms of mental health issue, and this needs to be changed. Because as a guidance officer in school, children are afraid to come to see me because they're afraid that their colleagues might bully them. So they would hide and they would come during instructional periods so that their colleagues may not see them. That is how difficult and how problematic it is. And then it is not allowing other persons with mental health issue to seek help because they're afraid that they're being judged, right? So that is my second issue I'm placing emphasis on, because without proper mental health support, then we cannot have a functional society. The third one is special education needs, SEN support in school. Now, studies have shown that early intervention for children with special education need can significantly improve educational outcomes. Now, we know this. We all know this. We're aware of this. However, the issue lies when there is a delayed identification of SEN in many schools. Now, I can give an example with this. As a school welfare officer, I'm not licensed to diagnose persons with mental health issues, but I can see some signs when you try talk therapy and all the other therapies and it's not working. You can see signs. So when I go forward to refer that child for identification and evaluation, the time it takes to give me the results so I can work with this child, the child probably drops out of school or the parent take the child out of school, which is very sad. It is a very sad situation. So that is the first issue. And the second one is a lack of individualized education plan. Now, you may ask, what is individualized education plan? This is a plan or program to develop to ensure any child with a disability attending school has a specialized education or learning service. So basically, it is when students who have a disability have a plan for better education. For example, if I am not hearing, if I'm have a hearing impairment, then probably I may need a sign language interpreter. And the fourth issue is youth participation in education policy. Research have indicate that student voices, one second please, indicates that student voices initiative leads to improved school climates and student engagement. Now, this is research. It shows that when students are involved, it improves engagement and all of the other things. Now, this is a limited Now, there is a limited representation of youth with disability in policy decision, and there is also a lack of formal channels for every youth to input their education planning. And this is why our voices are not heard, because there are so many gaps within policy making and all of that. Now, studies have shown that successful youth advocacy board in some countries leads to more positive policy changes. And in my country, we're trying that for persons with disability, but it's not there as yet. Now, I will go and place my recommendations. Now, my first recommendation this afternoon is to implement universal design principles in all schools. It may sound easy, but it's not. It will take time. But what is a universal design principle? It is classrooms that can accommodate persons with disability, person who's using a wheelchair, and every individual. So it's like a very inclusive classroom. Now, this might be difficult for some developing areas in the Caribbean because it may cost a lot. But this needs to be done in order for our youth voices to be amplified. The second one is to integrate mental health education into the curriculum. Now, mental health is important, like I've stated, and it needs to be implemented in our curriculum so that our children may know how to navigate themselves when they're facing certain kind of emotion, when they're having emotions, or they're seeing their friends with a different behavior. They will understand what is it and how to seek help. My third recommendation is to increase the number of um, special education needs professionals in school. This is something that has been addressed in Guyana, but it's newly been addressed. So there's not enough teacher there, and across the Caribbean as well, there's not enough professionals there. So there needs to be an increased amount of that. And the fourth recommendation this afternoon is to create formal channels for student input in education policy, such as school student advisory boards. Now, like we said before, our voices are important. So there should be channels where all student, not some, all student voices are heard and being implemented.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you. The research is clear, and the validation that we have received in the submissions by young people across the region in response to a survey that was prepared by a number of these young people and the others that I have mentioned really underscores the need for focused attention on mental health considerations and inclusion of persons with disabilities, students with special educational needs. Thank you, Anjali, for shining the light on that. And I think it links back well to Ash's earlier interventions on the need to ensure that all students have a voice and that there's that level of accountability and inclusion, meaningful engagement with young people as valued and equal development partners. And Anjali's presentation underscores the need for young people with mental health conditions, as well as young people with disabilities, to be a part of those decision-making processes as well. Thank you, Anjali. Varun?
Pleasant good afternoon to everyone. So, as I begin, I'd like to start with a statement. Too many children and young people in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean face challenges, leading them to leave school early and miss out on a brighter future. There was an article I read while doing my research about a student struggling and was given assistance to continue her educational prowess, and I would like to start by sharing it. The student faced overwhelming hardships, as I said before, living in a declining home and losing her mother right before the final exams. It left her devastated. The weight of these events forced her to drop out of school to support her grandmother. For months, she remained at home, feeling trapped and uncertain if she'd ever be able to return to her education. But her grandmother never lost hope. With her encouragement and support from a few caring community members, she received the help she needed, and after a long absence, she finally returned to school more determined than ever to push through the challenges and create a brighter future for herself. Now, instead of regretting that she left, she spends her days pursuing her dream and a brighter future. A significant sector of the youth population in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean face the same challenges, leading them to leave school early and miss out on a brighter future. The question is, how can we change the system so youth like her don't have to choose between survival and education? Let's begin by understanding the issue at hand: gender disparities in school dropouts. We're going to start by looking at the boys' dropout crisis in Trinidad. Boys in Trinidad are dropping out of school at higher rates than girls. According to recent data shared by UE St. Augustine, around 60% of all school dropouts in Trinidad are boys. This is driven by a mix of poor academic performance, with 40% of boys reporting feeling disconnected from the academic curriculum. Many boys, especially those who prefer hands on work or vocational paths, find what they're learning irrelevant to their future career prospects, leading to frustration and disengagement. While disenchantment with teaching delivery is not grounds for dropping out of school, the issue forces us to think about increasing participation levels of boys and young men. Social pressure is a major factor as well. In rural areas, particularly in southern and central Trinidad, over 50% of boys cite the need to leave school early to support their families. For these communities, education often becomes a luxury, and the immediate need to earn money takes precedence. Unfortunately, this pattern increases their risk of criminal activity and social vulnerabilities. Now let's look at the challenges faced by girls in Trinidad. While girls have higher retention rates than boys, they face their own set of significant challenges that lead to school dropout. With weak infrastructure for adolescent girls, teenage pregnancy impacts dropout rates. In addition, about 15% of girls leave school due to family obligations such as taking care of younger siblings or managing household duties. Economic hardship forces others to exit the school system, particularly in low income areas where girls often feel pressured to work and support their families. Gender based violence is Gender based violence and unsafe learning environments contribute to the problem, with approximately 10% of dropouts linked to harassment and violence in schools. Now, I can speak about this from the perspective of a friend after getting his permission. He actually dropped out of school at Form 1 due to being bullied. He was bullied because of his teeth and his size. Thankfully, with his mom's encouragement, he started back because he wants to make something great of himself. Without proper support systems in place, many youths find it difficult to return and complete their education. For this reason, it is important to focus on the gender experiences of both boys and girls and to make it in consultation and commit to supporting youth and child leadership in education, policy, and planning. Now, I just spoke about Trinidad, so I'd like to just take a small moment to speak on the wider Caribbean context and relevance. Similar patterns of school dropouts are seen across the Caribbean, particularly in Jamaica and Guyana. In Jamaica, approximately 40 to 45% of school dropouts are boys, driven by the same, as we spoke about before, disengagement from academic curricula and the pressure to earn money. Guyana faces similar challenges where around 35 to 40% of male dropouts occur due to rural poverty and limited employment opportunities. For girls, dropouts in both Jamaica and Guyana are linked to early pregnancy and the imposition of care duties for girls in the household. These trends highlight a shared regional issue where socioeconomic factors, disparities in vocational training, and limited resources create barriers for students to stay in school. For some, for some, the reason is socioeconomic. For others, teen pregnancy, they may face bullying or other forms of violence and discrimination due to gender and ethnicity. Inability to master the language if teaching is not delivered in their native language or even peer pressure. Very often, these students are known to be at risk of early exit, even in the absence of an early identification system. And yet, a system that is meant to mitigate early exit and promote retention, reentry, and success rarely creates space for the voices of often marginalized students in school or children and youth.
Thank you, Varun. I think very important points. Strong secondary data integrated, really setting the context and allowing us to understand what some of those drivers are for early exit, looking at the gendered nature of early exit as well, and the intersecting social categorizations and identities. If you're poor, low socioeconomic status, if you live in remote communities, if you don't have the kind of coping skills that are necessary. You spoke about if the language of instruction is not the student's first language. So I think very powerful observations. In terms of your call to action, can you share at least 3 key points that we can take away for consideration?
Of course. For the call to action, my 3 key points, I would say, is build capacity for a bottom up approach on education policy and planning that actively includes youth from the design stage rather than the top down status quo. 2, support mutually distributive accountability, whereas we young people are equal parties given the same powers to scrutinize and hold accountable all persons responsible for decisions in education. And 3, ensure that learning for youth engagement, leadership opportunities, and related outputs are responsive to the needs of different groups of boys and girls and young men and women. Young people whose lives may be more challenging need to have their voices, concerns, and solutions heard too. Amplifying youth voices brings fresh ideas and empowers young people to shape decisions that affect them, leading to more inclusive and effective solutions. It also builds their confidence and ensures policies reflect their needs. As I am closing, I would like to share an old Chinese proverb. The best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. The second best time is now. Thank you.
What a powerful way to end that presentation. And I really want to acknowledge Varun. Many of the young people with whom we work have been in the trenches for a long time. This forum has created the opportunity for Varun to make his first public presentation. And I really want to acknowledge how he has done. If we are serious about children and youth engaged in decision making and leadership, we have to constantly create opportunities for them to be heard, to know that you are listening to them, and to be integrated, as I said, as meaningful and value development partners. Congratulations, Varun. We welcome Rianka.
See how I'm in my black, white, and yellow? Very cultural, very demure, very mindful. Let's dive into the richness of the Garifuna language and heritage. Beauty, Rabanwiu. Good afternoon. Let's say it together. Beauty, Raba, Wiyu. Adisya, let me hear you. Thank you. So today we're going to touch on these 4 issues: understanding the issue, why should Indigenous education be included, our challenges, and recommendations. The Caribbean is a region known for its cultural diversity, a melting pot of Indigenous traditions, African heritage, European influences, and other influences that makes us unique. In this rich mosaic, education systems play a pivotal role in preserving and promoting cultural identity. Yet, many communities, especially Indigenous ones, remain underrepresented. The Caribbean Organization of Indigenous Peoples has been fighting for years to modernize the language used in schools. They advocate for changing how Indigenous groups are described, such as the harmful reference to the Kalinagos as cannibals. This outdated term perpetuates colonial prejudices and misrepresents the true history and culture of these people. Education is not just about learning math or science. It's about shaping identity, fostering belonging, and empowering students to understand their history, culture, and the world around them. When students learn about the history of the Caribbean, the focus is often on colonial encounters, beginning with Christopher Columbus, European colonization, slavery, and post independence struggles. However, including Indigenous history is not just about filling in historical gaps. It's about recognizing that these communities contributed significantly to the shaping of the Caribbean's cultural, social, and economic fabric. The Garifuna of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Kalinagos in Dominica, and other indigenous groups possess unique traditions, languages, and worldviews. Their cultures and traditions have left an indelible mark on the region. Yet, for far too long, their stories have been marginalized, if not entirely erased, from the official histories taught in our schools. The absence of Indigenous history in many Caribbean and OECS curriculum is not simply an oversight. It's a symptom of a larger issue, the legacy of colonialism in education. And yes, I said it. Colonial education systems were designed to serve colonial powers. They imposed European languages, values, and histories on indigenous and African populations, deliberately marginalizing or erasing local knowledge and traditions. Even after independence, many of these systems remained in place, reinforcing a Eurocentric worldview that prioritizes Western history, science, and philosophy over the contributions of indigenous peoples. This is why we must speak about decolonizing education. Decolonization is not just about adding indigenous history to textbooks. It's about challenging the power structures that define what is considered valuable knowledge. It involves re-evaluating the entire framework of education, what is taught, how it is taught, and who makes those decisions. To truly decolonize education in the Caribbean, we need to move away from the notion that European knowledge is universal or superior. Indigenous knowledge systems, whether related to land management, medicine, governance, or spirituality, hold significant value and relevance, especially in addressing global challenges like climate change, inequality, and resource depletion. In addition to advocacy, some progress has been made through initiatives aimed at increasing awareness of Indigenous culture. For instance, the UNDP distributed comic and coloring books in Dominica to engage younger generations with their cultural heritage. These resources are vital, but they are just the beginning. Indigenous history and culture needs to be embedded in the curriculum, ensuring that students learn about these topics throughout their education. An indigenous youth activist from in Dominica also emphasized that indigenous history must be taught in our schools. Yes, Alicia, watch me. Ensuring that students engage with these complex and meaningful topics in a way that resonates with their development. While the benefits of cultural and indigenous inclusions are clear, there are significant challenges to this goal. The disappearance of indigenous languages remains a critical issue. Vincentians, how many of you knew how to say good afternoon in Garifuna? All right. Many indigenous languages in the Caribbean have only a few fluent speakers left, or as in the case of some countries, none at all. Without deliberate efforts to teach these languages in schools, they risk extinction, along with the cultural perspectives they carry. A further barrier is the lack of political will and supporting policies. Many Caribbean nations have yet to implement national policies that foster cultural and indigenous inclusion in schools. Governments often prioritize other areas of education, sidelining the push for a culturally responsive curriculum as a lower priority. Additionally, the standardized curricula across the region tends to prepare students for national exams that reflects a narrow understanding of history and culture. Indigenous topics are often confined to isolated chapters or occasional lessons rather than being woven into the core of what students learn. To address this, we need to think beyond adding a single chapter on on indigenous perspectives. Indigenous history isn't just about the past, it is about understanding the roots of our identity. Furthermore, to truly achieve meaningful education reform, ministries and schools must recognize that they cannot operate in isolation from the communities they serve. Particularly indigenous and cultural communities. Inclusion must be a collaborative effort with youth voices at the forefront as equal and valuable partners. Lastly, sufficient funding is essential to implement these changes effectively. Governments must allocate financial resources to support teacher training, curriculum development, and the creation of indigenous languages programs. Funding is also needed to produce educational materials that reflect indigenous knowledge and culture. Without the necessary resources, efforts to decolonize the curriculum and foster cultural inclusion will fall short. By ensuring that students from all backgrounds see their cultures reflected in what they learn, we can foster a greater sense of belonging and understanding throughout the Caribbean and the OECS region. Decolonizing education is not an easy task, but it is a necessary one if we are to truly reflect the rich cultural diversity of the Caribbean and empower future generations. I'll end with this. This is where we must do better as a nation. Relying on external organizations to drive cultural preservation projects is not sustainable. While external support like that from the UNDP can be helpful, the responsibility to safeguard our cultural heritage must come from within. We as a region need to do better at owning and driving these initiatives ourselves. External organizations should complement, not lead, efforts to preserve and celebrate our indigenous culture. I thank you.
I thank you, Rianka, and thank you also for acknowledging the contributions of Indigenous young people from across the region. I know you have consulted as well with an Indigenous leader from Guyana, primary input, secondary data, and you have delivered a powerful presentation. And I'm sure that the Jamaicans won't mind if I say Liko but Talawa. So I think, and again, for our youth panel, the same. Young people have a message. They have delivered it powerfully. We're now going to open the floor. I know we started a bit late, and perhaps we need to get back on time. So I'm awaiting a signal from the back. How long do we have? 15 minutes? 10 minutes. We're going to open the floor. We want to hear from you in terms of your thoughts on the key issues and recommendations proposed, biggest takeaways, Any gaps or additional issues, any good practices or lessons learned on the issues they have presented in terms of the inclusion of various groups, the empowerment of young people, co-creating solutions, and integrating young people in education, policy, and planning. We have 10 minutes. Do we have any questions from the floor or comments? Okay, we have a mic over to my left. Oh, so Tiffany, Dr. Tiffany Scarrett Fleming, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kimberly. I want to invite the audience to give a round of applause again to the youth panelists. I feel proud to be in the room and being represented by these delegates. And you've raised some very important points, which I think are worth reiterating. There are opportunities for collaboration. In my current position, I sit as one of the members of the CDB's Future Leaders Network. And I want to share with you what meaningful youth engagement has looked like for those members of this group over the last year plus. I also sit as my friend Matai would say, as CARICOM Youth Ambassador Emeritus or transitioning legacy ambassador for the island of Montserrat. When our regional institutions like CDB, like CARICOM, engage young people in meaningful ways, we're looking at opportunities for training, we're looking at opportunities for sharing, but also beyond that, opportunities for what would be considered advocacy or advisory roles. And just 2 weeks ago, I was at home and had the opportunity to sit on a panel of young people providing our input on a national mental health policy. We've referenced today the importance, and we'll continue to do that at our breakout session, how we connect transforming education with mental health, how we connect transforming education with the well-being of students. And part of that is empowering them and providing them with the opportunities to speak, not only in these forums, but behind the closed doors where the real decisions are made. And so I think it's a powerful thing to be here amongst the youth delegates and having the opportunity to speak with so many of you who are education officers, permanent secretaries, who are senior teachers, who are principals, who are also engaged in higher levels of academia, who have the power to empower. And I encourage you to do so. And also to, in expanding the conversation about indigenous heritage and history, being really thoughtful about how we engage, being really thoughtful about how we become more inclusive. So thank you to the panel and pleasure learning and growing with you.
If you can introduce yourself quickly by name and your organization, that'd be appreciated.
Good afternoon, Elena Smith. I hail from Belize, Mother Nature's best kept secret. And I'm here representing the Caribbean Union of Teachers. Like to say, Sarah May, it was a very good presentation. I think that we can learn a lot from our young people, and it's important that we recognize and understand that culture is important. And here at home, we do have a school where our teachers teach our children Garifuna, and so they're able to learn the language, learn the culture, and from a young age, they're brought up into that system so that our children don't forget, or we don't see that our culture, our languages are dying out. So those are important. I think that as we move along, as those of us who are adults here, who are not youths, as we go back to our various territories, that we must impart this information, and we must ensure that those in leadership positions, as we all are, will take the time to look at the recommendations of our youth this afternoon and see how we can embed those in our systems, and implement some of the recommendations that they made, because they're very key, again, in terms of having our youth involved, but in preserving our culture and our heritage. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. Dr. Sylvia Wilkes. That was awesome. It's really lovely to hear young people speak with such passion. I think it was last year, I invited Minister Taylor from Turks and Caicos to speak to our young people, and she inspired me. She brought her national youth policy, and she inspired me so much, I decided to change my doctoral final project to do an analytical overview of the national youth policy and asset building for Turks and Caicos, Bahamas, Jamaica, and Cayman Islands. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity I had to do that, because I looked at Dr. Charles' work as well as Miss Gilbert Roberts. Had a pleasure to speak with her as well. And with what you guys are saying, and I have a question for you, Ms. Cowell, based on what Dr. Charles often said in terms of the asset-based perspective versus deficit perspectives as it relates to our youth. And he makes the thought of the theoretical perspectives as welfarist versus trans or revolutionary, what all of you have spoken about have gone in that direction in terms of transforming and empowering our young people. You made mention of getting feedback from our young people as it relates to education. What are your thoughts? What specific ideas are you expecting? Because I have some thoughts, but I want to hear what you have to say in terms of the feedback you're expecting.
Sure. In terms of feedback, so I guess I'll give a little bit of an experience. So last night, just in terms of concluding the preparation process, one of the CARICOM youth ambassadors, Joshua, was here, and he in minutes created a chatbot that was able to help to curate a lot of the information that we needed. I know Kem has also used some similar tools, and he's also integrating these in different regional spaces. So you have young people that have the skill and talent to do basic things like this that have, I guess, very have magnitudes in terms of the repercussions in terms of how it can garner the information. We also have like surveys. One of the things that we tried to do is that we did have a survey that would be used to try to get some information as well. So trying to partner with the teachers, with the parent teacher organizations, all of these different regional platforms as well. So now you can have the impact and the feedback of our students to see what is it that they're feeling, what is it that they're learning, and how we can use that to implement and build the system to make it transformative.
So this will be accessible to all young people, so
Yes.
they're giving their experiences in the classroom as well.
Agreed. And I think just to take us a step further, one of the things is that there's need for greater collaboration across the region, because whilst it is that we're separated by the sea, that's basically the only thing that really makes us very different. We have such shared lived experiences, and so therefore trying to have that shared knowledge experiences, so that way we can know, okay, these are what the youth of our region are experiencing, and how is it that we can take the lessons learned and ensure that they are incorporated. As I said, Mel is a missing aspect oftentimes. So we monitor and we evaluate, but are we taking the learning abilities for the sustainability aspects?
Awesome. Thank you, kind.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions or comments? There was a point raised in the chief's presentation, the chief education officer from Barbados, and Dr. Murphy, I know that you have been working with the team in the ministry on transformation, and chief referenced the work that has been done in ensuring that students' voices are a critical part of the decision-making process. If you wouldn't mind, could you share with us in 30 to 60 seconds any key highlights of that process, and perhaps what is the vision to institutionalize approaches like that so that we have a framework for student engagement?
Only Kimberly Gittins would put me on the spot. I actually want to veer away from your question a bit, Kimberly. And yes, we've been doing a lot. We've been representing the youth in all of our work at the Ministry of Education as we look to transform education in Barbados. But I sat next to the chief and Dr. Denny this afternoon, and I said, we need to do more. We need to go a bit further. Yeah. And what you said this evening resonated with me so much in terms of it's okay to collaborate, it's okay to ask for the opinion of our youth, but we can't just leave it there. We have to drill down. We have to do more. So they have to be there at the conceptualization, they have to be there at the implementation, and they have to be there at the evaluation. Because it has to be that they are indeed part of the entire process if we are going to speak about true youth engagement. And that came through so strongly to me this afternoon. Two other things. One about inclusivity. Inclusivity, again, is so big, so broad, so deep, and so important and meaningful. We got it from the perspective of a person with disability, and we got it from the perspective of a person who understands the trials and the angst and tribulations and the difficulty and challenges of persons from an indigenous background whom we have not catered for in our education system whatsoever over the years. And therefore, I think it is important for us to understand the importance of inclusivity and inclusion and bringing our young people along in that regard. So those were, some of the highlights for me in terms of the presentation this evening, and I hope that we have an opportunity to engage more with these young people going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. I have received my red card, and so I need to wrap up. I'm going to wrap up in a slightly different way. Apologies, because I know we've submitted a run of show, and I'm going to veer a little bit off track. Let me begin by thanking our presenters. They've been brilliant. Our timekeeper, rapporteur, and of you and all of you, of course, for really being focused on what they have to say. And I'm sure that you will take quite a lot of it away. And we look forward to seeing your KPIs and the reports on how you have integrated their recommendations and how you're working with the young people and the students in your countries as well. Asha Gay, I'm going to yield to you. I think you need to hear a youth voice to close this session out. I will be forgiven. It is best to take the risk and ask for forgiveness later. Asha, if you can just give us those 5 key steps very quickly, we'd be appreciative, and we close as soon as Asha is done. Thank you.
So as we close, I wanted to remind us, according to the UN Economic and Social Council, the Caribbean is home to more than 11 million youth between ages of 15 and 29. That's how many young people you have at your disposal to participate in these processes. So ensure that we're co-creators. Amplification is the point of this panel. Amplification means to make louder. So how do you do that? Through institutionalization of youth representations in education and governance, integrate youth voices in your curriculum reform, and implement structured youth engagement platforms. Inclusivity, we've been hearing it very often here. My fellow panelists also spoke to it. Mental health considerations are very important, so ensure that this is something that's mainstreamed as we go forward. Indigenous people considerations, again, because we are Caribbean people. To know where we are going, we have to know where we're coming from. And so therefore, I think it's very important to ensure that we maintain our identity as Caribbean people. Policy versus politics. A lot of the times we don't have the sustainability of things because of policy versus politics. So funding allocation and projectization versus programmatization is also very important in that regard, ensuring that the policy is separated from the politics so we can have sustainability. Developing countries have a niche reality, and therefore we can collectively and collaboratively work together. We need to reduce our silos, separated by the sea, I said, but that's the largest thing that separates us. So we need to secure funding for youth-led educational initiatives, ensure that there's monitoring, evaluation, and learning that's being infused to inform these processes, and just facilitate knowledge sharing. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. That brings us to the end of our panel discussion. Thank you.